The Glow came about as part of a commission for a show that was called This is the Time, This is the Record of the Time, that was shown first in Amsterdam and then at AUB. And a group of artists were asked to respond to the idea of time, actually, and think about different ways of creating a visual record of time. The painting, The Glow, came about as a response to that, and as actually the piece that I showed in that exhibition. And I was working on it while I was in residence in Rome. I had been there for 9 months already and dealing specifically with time, so it came at a good moment in terms of my own studio practice, and thinking about how to see through time, if that was possible. So in Rome, I was specifically looking at the different images of historical sites in Rome, and trying to collect all the material and use that to create new images that somehow combined or collapsed that information into one view. When I started working on The Glow, I decided to approach this idea of perception through a kind of focal point and a peripheral vision. So when asked to visualize time, I thought about this inaccuracy of images, and specifically of photographic images, which I'll come back to, where you always had a very clear center and then a border or end to the image, which to me was a contradiction to how you experienced or saw anything. So I wanted to try to find a way to address that problem of seeing, where you really don't see neither a whole or a framed picture, nor a center and an edge. And if anything, to be more accurate, I sort of thought that actually everything is sort of more peripheral than central. So you see a series of peripheral fragments, if you want, both in terms of how we see what our eyes sort of focus in on and filter out, but then also this idea of looking over time. So, you know, not only seeing in instantaneous moments, but seeing things in continuation, how those sort of the accumulation of what you're looking at changes. So, so at one moment, you know, you're seeing something clarity, and then that shifts. And so I did think a lot about early photographs, the problem of timing the exposure correctly, how a lot was lost or gained, you know, almost by accident in terms of light. And then the problem of the photograph itself to fade, or so you would actually lose the image itself, both physically with the object and then with time. As soon as you had that image, it had already changed, or your view of it had changed. So thinking of those two things, this sort of fading, if you want, or disappearing photograph, and the priority of the peripheral over the center, led me to begin working on The Glow, first in a few sort of small sketches, and then the final piece ended up being quite a large painting on canvas. The size of the painting itself was quite important, because what I wanted the painting to be able to do was not only give a visual representation of my idea of how we see through time, but rather kind of create an experience for the viewer. So from a certain distance, you could see the whole painting, and as you moved closer, you would end up having to choose whether you would go into the center, which ended up disappearing, so quite a large void, or if you would choose to go from one side to the other to get the clearer, more in-focused part of the painting on either edge. So the subject of The Glow is actually a composite mountain. So what I ended up doing was using multiple images that I had been taking both in Lebanon and in Italy, of different mountain ranges. I've been working with mountains for a while as a subject. For me, what they are able to do is actually place you physically, so that seeing them, you understand both where you are in relation to the mountain and how big you are, literally. So you have a sort of physical understanding in relation to the mountain. When I started working with time, that shifted. I was using more place and perception itself to actually work to place you in time, if you will. But I was still interested, as I had mentioned, in creating a work that would act on the viewer. And so I still chose to work with that mountain imagery to help place the viewer in a kind of familiar landscape, if you want, so that they understood or could recognize where they were, what they were looking at, and rather that their experience would be more moving towards or away and seeing, rather than trying to understand what they were looking at. The mountain itself is actually a combination of one that is on the Via Appia and a mountain in the Mount Lebanon region, both of which I have looked at over time, so have gathered multiple images of both of these mountains from different perspectives and different times of day. So they provided me with enough material to really play around with blurring both the actual view that you were seeing and also the time of day that you were looking at it. So what I was trying to do is create something that was quite familiar and recognizable without giving so much information that you would identify it either in time or geographic location. The glow was really a key point in my own practice of where I was able to sort of let go of the narrative a bit. Past projects had much more of a certain trajectory that I was following and collecting information from, or were very tied to a certain location. I did something on the St. George in Beirut. With the glow and since the glow, I am using very specific images and places that I go to, return to, photograph, but that in a way is only serves for the experience to start and then is let go of quite quickly.